Think of Jefferson Airplane, White Rabbit, 1967. Let's take you back. I've got the lyrics here. One pill makes you larger, one pill makes you small. And yeah, let's take Ken's hand and let him lead us down the rabbit hole.
Okay, yeah, my name's Ken Westin. I live here in Portland, Oregon. I want to thank BSides for having me. It's quite an honor to actually be asked to keynote here. Been born and raised here in Portland. I'm going to be talking about going down the rabbit hole, and I'll tell you what that means in just a little bit. But I am an Oregon native. I actually grew up without the internet, so that tells you how old I am. I actually didn't get really involved in computers until late, probably high school or so, really. I actually had some learning disabilities. One of them was dysgraphia. So I was raised a lot, well, with school. I didn't do so well. I always thought I was really stupid. But once I was actually diagnosed and they actually identified what it was, I was able to get access to computers. And all of a sudden, I felt like I had a superpower. I was always struggling with how to communicate, things like that, and now using computers, I was doing really well. I was able to do a lot of writing. I had a lot to say. I ended up going to college. I went to Lewis and Clark. I got an English degree because I loved writing. I took all the free classes that they had at the time around this thing called the internet that was starting to be a big deal. So I learned how to build web pages. I got really excited about this and started to really get into technology. And my first job out of college was actually at a sake brewery, where I actually ended up not just working in the tasting room, but I actually built an online store to sell rice wine, things like that. Then I went to work for a startup and things like that. I even ended up working at Pacific University, where I was their first webmaster. I also ended up being an adjunct instructor. A nice thing about being there is that I got to take all the free classes I wanted, so I took all the computer science courses I possibly could. I then transferred and got a master's degree in internet systems development. And then I went to work in a lot of startups and things. I was doing a lot of web development, started getting more into web administrator, started doing web application development, things like that. And that's when I started getting involved in security. And so I'll start to talk a little bit about that and how I kind of fell down the rabbit hole in a lot of respects when it came to security, and how it led to other rabbit holes along the way. So the idea here is I'm going to talk about some of the investigations I've been part of, how that led to development of technologies and things like that, and really how it kind of led to my career and where I am today. I'm also, my hobbies, I play guitar. I play in a band called Sylvia's Ghost here in Portland. Sometimes we play McMinimans and things like that. I'm also a record hoarder. Yeah, if you guys ever want to jam, let me know. So what do I mean by rabbit holes? When I look at security, particularly, I think some of us, particularly with like ADHD, we understand what a rabbit hole is. We have some challenges when it comes to organization and things like that, but when you get us hyper-focused on something, we don't stop. We do not give up, right? And sometimes that can be a good thing, sometimes that can be a bad thing, and it can also set you up for burnout. Also, on the other side of that, I think it's also this effing around and finding out. It's experimenting. It's about trying new things. And I think what really attracted me security was that ability to be able to innovate, to be able to go down these rabbit holes, to be able to try new things that you can't necessarily do, to utilize technology in ways that they weren't meant to be utilized, and even break it at some point. So I kind of pulled a few quotes because, going down the rabbit hole, the idiom, the metaphor, it actually comes from Alice in Wonderland. A great story. We talk about going down rabbit holes, and it's interesting. Is like sometimes I wake up and I'm like, how the heck did I get here? And then I realize, it wasn't just me alone. Like, what I was able to actually rely on a community. And we always talk about the caterpillar, we're all mad here, right? And I think everyone that's doing security, they're a little bit, I think a little bit different than you might find in other areas of technology and other sectors as well. I think that rings true for most of us. A while back, when I was doing security, I ended up having a startup. I got involved in writing some USB-based Trojans. I was really interested in it, and I was trying to find ways to actually utilize this technology for good, for actually tracking stolen devices. This led me down to multiple rabbit holes. I ended up developing technology to track USB devices, laptops, mobile phones, even started getting into tracking stolen cameras by looking at EXIF data that's embedded in images and building search engines that were around that. I actually presented this at DEF CON. It was DEF CON 23. It was kind of my first time actually presenting at a big conference. Scared the crap out of me, but I'm glad I did it. But of course, after I did that, when I was talking about all these recoveries, I ended up getting a lot of media exposure. So media exposure that wasn't so good sometimes. Being called a professional cyber stalker, being called the real-life Mr. Robot. You can imagine how that puts a nice big target on your back for doxing and things like that. But this was great. I actually ended up becoming a talking head. I worked at Tripwire. I had the opportunity to talk to the media a lot. I think even like Travis here, he refers to me as a media whore. I think he's just jealous because he's always stealing my slides. But you know, it was actually a really good thing. I was able to get out there. The startup that I had, it failed, and it was probably one of the lowest points of my life. I had a really hard time. But once I kind of came out of it and I was going out in the sector, I realized just how much I learned in that process. So I'm going to walk you guys through some of the investigations I worked on and talk about how, how I think about running investigations and also how some of those investigations led to new innovations. So when you think about doing investigations, it's never just like one alert. Like if you're doing incident response, you can't just rely on one alert. You have to be able to pivot. Maybe you're using Splunk or other data sources. It's always going to be gathering a lot of different sources. If you ever look at any of the sort of murder shows or any detective shows, you'll always see these walls where they're drawing lines between the pieces of evidence. They're called crazy walls, appropriately named. And that's really how a lot of these investigations start. You may start with one piece of information, but you're going to pivot. And then it's really not necessarily technical exercise, it's really an exercise in creativity to be able to identify and make more sense of that particular alert. Does anyone know who this guy is? Very close, yes, forensics. This is the OG hacker when it comes to criminals. His name is Edmund Lacard. He's the grandfather of forensic science. He actually developed a lot of like forensic techniques, even fingerprints that we utilize today. Some of the techniques he actually pioneered. He was referred to as the Sherlock Holmes of in France. This was in I think he died in 1966 or so. But he really developed a lot of the techniques, and he had this concept, this sort of axiom is every contact leaves a trace. And I was reading about him, and I was like, holy crap, this is it. His idea was that this is dealing with physical crimes, where when you commit a crime, you leave something and you take something with you. And I was thinking about this when it comes to investigations. I'd say every digital contact also leaves a trace. It's just a matter of, do we have the mechanisms to detect it? Do we have the ways to actually archive, search for that data? And so you'll kind of see that as we go through some of these investigations. So I was working for a company before. I was doing web development. I was sort of a one-man web army. My only experience with security at that point was securing a web server. I was responsible for basically securing a LAMP stack. But the company I worked for started building a product that would actually block USB flash drives. This became a big issue with things like Autorun and Windows XP, things like that. It was becoming a really big problem where, forget trying to hack a network. If I can actually plug a flash drive into a computer, it's a heck of a lot easier for me to compromise that network. Also, there's tools that would actually allow me to slurp data. I can grab all sorts of information from it, and so they wanted to be able to block it. And I got really interested in this, and I started looking into some of these tools. And I was like, this is neat, and I started actually playing with them, and I actually started writing some of my own. And I was like, I'm going to build a website to raise awareness around this. So it was called usbhacks.com. I put it up and I actually started putting up some of these tools. And the idea here was that you could download them and you could play with them and to raise awareness. Anyway, that was the first time the FBI contacted me. But once I explained to them what I was trying to do and the intent, this is kind of what we're talking about with security research now. Hacking is not a crime. And when they started realizing my intent, and in some cases I actually even helped them in some cases where I had some really weird people that were approaching me. In one case, there was a guy that approached me that looked like he had physical access to a facility, and he was asking for some specific payloads and asking if I would help. I actually sent that over to the FBI because this was really fishy. Come to find out, yes, he was a well-known bad guy, bad hacker in the Middle East, and they thanked me for it. So anyway, that got the FBI off my back for a little while. So next idea was, how do I turn that into something that's actually useful? I started playing with it, and at the time I was actually working on my master's degree, and I was like, I was playing with this and, messing with friends, sending them flash drives that would do all sorts of nasty things to their computer, pop-ups, things like that, direct them to fun websites. And so I said, well, what if I did this for theft recovery? So I built a friendly Trojan that when executed, it would hijack the computer it's connected to, gather user information, and then it would send it to a mothership. And I tested this out. I was like, I'm going to put it on dig.com. So anyone know dig.com? All right, for all the kids out there, dig.com is like Reddit for old people, okay? And the idea was, I wanted to get a few people to test it, and it ended up being on the homepage of Dig, and I ended up having like 20,000 devices being registered. I can't believe the server actually held up, but I also utilized that when they were running the agents. I was gathering information about the devices that they were connected, so I actually created this huge database of all of the potential devices that I could compromise with these executables, and we even started getting some recoveries. It was really interesting. We were recovering iPods, we were recovering all these different devices. And this is the information we were able to gather. It was really simple. It was just internal network information, IP address, getting some geo-IP location, the username and things like that, which would be really helpful. But I really wanted to limit it. I didn't want to go nasty like with some of these things. I could have gotten credentials and done a lot more malicious things. But the idea here was just, what do I need to be able to track that device and where it is if it got stolen? And then I had another case where it got a lot more interesting. We had a professor who had his dissertation that was taken off of a flash drive from his desk. And this is a time where I was like, okay, I'll see if I can help. I started looking at the data, and we were getting connections from an ISP. That's not really helpful. It gives me the IP address, but unless I get a subpoena from law enforcement to go in and actually get the address and all that, it's not going to be useful. And that could take anywhere from weeks to months if you can get it at all. But then we started getting connections from a computer lab at the University of North Texas. What's interesting is we were able to actually identify a specific computer lab just from the internal network information. And then talking to campus security, we realized that they'd actually put in cameras and some key cards because they recently had a bunch of laptop thefts. So we were able to correlate the timestamps that we had on the USB connection, the internet connections from the USB Trojan to the key swipes as well as the camera, and we were able to identify who was in the room at the time, and they were able to get a recovery. So this is kind of those crazy wall types of things where you start looking at not just that data source, you start to look at other data sources that are available for your investigation. And they ended up getting it back. I'm not sure if the kid actually stole it or they took it, but the important thing is that he got his dissertation information back. And also another reason why you need backups. And then I was getting a lot of press with some of this stuff, and I was approached by FLIR, and they make very high-end thermal imaging cameras. Now, these cameras cost anywhere from $3,000 to $300,000. And I ended up signing a deal. This was one of my bigger deals, and this is actually around the time I quit my job and started focusing on this full time. I was able to not only build the Trojans, because we had a challenge with this because if it wrote to an SD card. If you take the SD card out, great, you put a new one in, then we don't have the agent. So this is where we actually installed something in the firmware that would check to see if the agent was enabled. If it wasn't, then it would rewrite it, and we were able to get access to it. What's interesting with this too is that it wasn't just used for theft recovery. They had issues with export controls. Some of these devices are not allowed to be in certain countries, and they had situations where they were being sold to some of these countries. They were showing up in Iran, for example. And so they couldn't tell me all the details, but they did utilize this to identify a distributor that might have been selling places they shouldn't. And you'll notice that there's this little cat here. I actually disguised the Trojan on the card as a cat. They gave me some of the thermal imaging cameras. I got to play with them, and that's my cat Nobby. So then further down the rabbit hole, I was like, okay, this is all fun and all, but well, let's go after something that actually has a lot more value at the time, laptops. Well, at the time, laptops all had, most of them were coming out with web cameras, and it wasn't necessarily being utilized. I think there was one Mac developer that was utilizing that for some things, but you know, that's helpful, but you don't have all the information that you need. Though at the time, there was the iPhone that came out, and I was interested because the first iPhone didn't have a GPS chip. It was able to get location, and it was using Wi-Fi for location. And I dug deeper into it, and I contacted the company that had that technology called Skyhook Wireless, and I was able to actually put that into the product. So this is the first time we actually had a laptop, a theft recovery product, that when you activate tracking, it will gather the photo of the person that's using your computer. It would also gather other information about the network, and then we'll also get the location of that device, and it was accurate within 5 to 10 meters. And at the time, I didn't want to have to secure a server, and I was also really concerned about privacy because I wanted to make sure that if we're going to gather people's photos and things like that, that you know we have that secured. I was worried about what if we get hacked, and all of a sudden now someone's photos are compromised. So instead of me taking on that liability, I integrate with Flickr. So you would integrate with your Flickr account, and then that was only thing I tracked is if you had tracking activated off or on. We then, over time, we modified that, and we did have a central server to control all this when I actually got some funding, and I was able to hire real developers to help build that architecture out. We actually got our first recovery. It was in Brooklyn, New York. This was really interesting. It was a guy, he had an iMac, and he had a bunch of camera equipment that were stolen from his house. And I got a call from a New York detective, and he was really frustrated. He was kind of mad about these types of things because there was another company that was doing theft recovery, and it's a lot of paperwork you had to file because it's IP address. You have to get go to the carrier, the ISP. You have to write all this information, validate it, and it'd take anywhere from 2 weeks to several months, and he was like frustrated. He was like, this is a waste of my time. And I'm like, no, I'm getting location. We have Wi-Fi location. Look, just take a photo, this photo, and then go look around that area and ask people around. And then, of course, he told me not to tell him how to do his job or whatever, but he finally did it. And sure enough, they found the laptop. It was in the back of a tattoo parlor. This is the back of an office. And if you see, there's a bunch of other really cool stuff like mixers and audio equipment. They went in and they found all sorts of stolen property. And this is where I started realizing that this is how I can actually get law enforcement to care. They don't care about the individual laptops, but if I can unveil larger organized crime rings, if I can find other fencing operations and I can find these larger things that are being done, then that's when they become the hero, and we started doing a lot more of that. So this was a really fun case. There was a bunch of schools in Portland here that were getting hit repeatedly. It was the weirdest thing. Like they would have a bunch of laptops stolen, they would replace them, and then a week or two later, they would be stolen again. They couldn't figure out how it was happening. And so we decided, let's give them some bait laptops. So they put them out, and sure enough, within 2 weeks, they got stolen, and we started getting connections. And you can see there's a photo of the fellow. And the detective went out there. It was actually traced to Vancouver. And I explained to the police officer the detective what you want to do. Just it's within 10 to 20 meters. He goes there, knocks on the door, and the guy that works on his roof answers the door. And he's like, "You don't know what you're talking about, Ken. I know this guy. You're wasting our time." I got mad, so I drove out there to Vancouver. I'm sitting there, and I was actually scanning the Wi-Fi networks to make sure that the information we were gathering was correct. Now, one of the Wi-Fi networks that was on there was said Russia. And then I looked over, and there was where the detective had gone, it was a duplex. He had gone to the one on the left. And the one on the right, there's a car right in front of the driveway with this giant Russian Pride bumper sticker. So I'm there, and I have my laptop open, and I swear the guy actually walks out the door, and he looks at me, and I'm like an idiot on my laptop with this huge antenna sticking out of my car. And I'm just like, actually, I'm like acting like I'm lost. Like, oh, I'm just looking for directions or whatever. I don't think he suspected anything. But I told the detectives, they finally came out, and they said they ended up getting them. I thought I was going to have to testify. This was kind of a scary time. I found out these guys were pretty bad news. The guy even told me, it's like, yeah, it's not that guy you got to worry about. He's actually friends with the guy across the street. He's part of his gang, where you have your car parked right now in front of his house. He's really bad news. But they ended up busting. There was like 6 or 7 people that were involved. I didn't have to be involved to testify. They listed me as an anonymous whatever source, and they got them all to turn on each other, thinking that they'd all ratted each other out. So I was relieved. We had another interesting case where this is where I started getting really a lot more into the OSINT side of things on the investigations. We had a laptop that was stolen, and I didn't get any connections for like 2 weeks. I was like, oh crap, they probably reformatted the drive or sold it for parts or something like that. But then we started getting connections in Missouri. I'm like, what the hell? And we were getting tons of photos. There was this guy named Victor. It was really nice of him because he actually changed the username on the computer to his full name. So I had first name, last name. It was great. So when I looked him up, I found all kinds of stuff. He was a big car nut. So Scions, he really liked those cars. He's on these forums, and so he posted photos of his cars. So I also had his license plate number on his MySpace. And then on eBay, he was a big eBay seller, and he was selling used car parts, so you can kind of get an idea of the business. Working with the police, this was the first case. We actually provided this to the district attorney, and they said, holy crap, you have so much evidence here. Like, even if they don't have the laptop, we can still bust them for possession of stolen property. He ended up selling the laptop and a stolen bike to his friend Omar. I found out that he actually received the bike and the laptop from his father, who was actually part of this group. What they do is there was another Russian organized crime group. They work in Missouri and then Portland. They basically share stolen property, because if you get something stolen here in Portland, where's the first place you're going to look? Craigslist locally. So what they did was they steal a bunch of property, load it up into a white truck, drive it to Missouri, exchange goods, and then that's how they're able to fence some of this stuff. So this was a really interesting case. We started getting a better understanding of how some of these groups are actually operating. It also worked internationally. We had a friend, Sky Alberto, who's in Brazil. He was a veterinary student. He was in a car with a friend. They were held at gunpoint, told to get out of the car. His friend was punched and knocked down to the ground, and they took off with the car with his laptop in the back seat. We were able to get connections. We were getting photos, and the Brazilian police at the time, they worked closely with us, because I guess these guys were involved in a lot of these cases, and I think their one person was in the hospital. He almost died, and that they had attacked. So it was kind of nice. Like, we're not just solving your cyber crimes and things like that. We're also helping to solve physical crimes. So again, further down the rabbit hole, I was like, what else more can we do? At the time, smartphones were becoming much more prominent. And what I found is that people don't really care too much about the value of the device itself. What they really cared about was the data. But I was really nervous. Again, I didn't want to back up people's photos or contact information, things like that. So we actually built a way that you would actually put an encryption key on your phone. Only you knew it. And then when you activate tracking or whatever, you could download this file, and then you would decrypt it with that key. So I never had the decryption key. There's no way I could view anyone's photos. And this is helpful too. Like, if law enforcement came to us and said, hey, we need this person's information, I'm like, well, here's the blob of data. You're going to have to go to them to get the encryption key, and that provided a little bit of peace of mind when we were doing this. We had some interesting recoveries, and I think I got a video here, so I can stop talking for a minute.
That's helping track them down. News Channel 8's Ed Teachout spent the past 2 days with police and investigators on the trail of swiped cell phones. He's live outside the Washington Square Mall where the theft took place. Ed?
Well, the managers of the Sprint store here at the Washington Square Mall behind me say they're very confident that tracking software developed only miles away from here and put onto their demo phones will lead to an arrest.
This is a $500 phone. This ended up being a $450 phone.
2 empty display cradles are all that remains after someone stole 2 demo cell phones from the Sprint store at Washington Square Mall on Saturday. Moments after surveillance video caught the theft on tape, employees initiated tracking software installed on the stolen phones.
We were able to not only find the GPS location of the individuals that took them, but also we've been able to to monitor any activity that happens in the phone.
That activity turned out to be pictures someone took shortly after the phones were stolen. Tigard police admit it's a brave new world when pictures taken on cell phones can be told to send back pictures once they're stolen.
And that has not only piqued the interest of our investigators, but in essence appears at this point could be very credible information for us to follow up on.
The Portland creator of the software tracking the theft says police are on the right track.
If they're not the thieves, they definitely know who stole it.
And if you look over the head of this man, you'll see in the window an Oregon temporary permit. Philip, this is Ed. With the help of a gadget track investigator on the phone, we tracked the stolen phone signal to this Vancouver apartment complex. There we found the exact temporary permit and a young woman who told us off camera a man she called Peter had sent this photo to her Saturday evening, but says she knew nothing about the phones. Hi, my name is Ed. We tracked the second cell phone signal to this duplex about 8 blocks away. You don't have a Samsung Epic phone in this location?
No. Police were here yesterday looking for it.
We're back live now outside the Washington Square Mall, where we've just obtained within the hour the DMV records on that temporary permit. Tigard police say they hope the men in the pictures will contact them soon so they can explain how their faces ended up on a stolen cell phone. Back to you.
Thank you, Ed. Teach out. The contractor is accused of overspraying.
Anyway, that was actually a lot of fun to work on that particular case. There were some challenges with it. Some of the GPS coordinates that were actually getting sent back weren't very reliable. But what I did find was that we were able to get the images. Again, the Sprint store chain that actually had installed this, they gave me the encryption key to go ahead and decrypt the images. And I found that there was a bunch of data that was actually embedded in the images that they were taking. So those photos actually had the GPS coordinates, and those were much more accurate. That led me down to another rabbit hole on EXIF data. But one thing that
that's helping track.
But one thing I should say is that, this is an application that people installed on their devices willingly, right? So if you steal my device, I have the right to go ahead and I can activate tracking, I can do that. What's scary to me now is the direction that this has gone. It's to a point now where we have commercial spyware vendors that are providing technology that are leveraging zero-day vulnerabilities against their citizens. And this is, I think, is something that should raise concern.
That's helping.
One example is the NSO group. Have you all heard of Pegasus? Okay, so this is really worries me. These companies, they'll say that, hey, these are, we only do it for terrorists, people that are criminals. Well, who's a criminal? How do you define a criminal? Some of these are being utilized in countries where you have very authoritative regimes. They're deploying some of these technologies to people that they consider enemies, that are journalists, that are dissidents, and things like that. And I think this is, there's actually a case right now with the EU and the PEGA committee that are trying to control how we're deploying some of this software. The NSO group is now blacklisted in the US. There's been a lot of disinformation around this particular technology and things like that. I've been doing my part to try to help to stop some of this disinformation. But what's really interesting is that the community, the InfoSec community has really come together to help stop this particular threat in many ways. But just something I wanted to put as an aside. But kind of go back to this, I got really interested in the EXIF data again. I even built a tool. If you go to exif.io, you can actually upload images and it'll look for any valuable information that I might be able to find in an image. It'll look for GPS coordinates, it'll look for the make and model of a camera, and things like that. So I got really interested in this, and I found that looking at EXIF data, a lot of the high-end cameras were actually embedding the make, model, and the serial number of the camera. And I had this theory, well, what if I was able to create a database, if I could get all these different images and the serial numbers, and you could search for the serial number of your camera, and we'll show you all the places online that we found that photo. or photos that were taken by that camera. It was sort of an experiment I did. I had like maybe a few computers I was doing this on. I was trying to index all of Flickr, for example, and I was just doing these Python and PHP scripts, and I was like, this is going to take forever. It'd probably take me like 10 years to mine the whole thing. But I had a friend that had a startup, and he had this thing where they're doing it where it's basically a legal botnet, where it's kind of like a study at home, where universities can provide their idle computer labs to go ahead and we can deploy workloads to those computer labs, and it's a lot cheaper than trying to go to the cloud. So we experimented. I think we had over 1,000 computers that were doing this, and I just basically deployed my shitty Python script to these 1,000 ones, and we're able to actually index all of Flickr. I also was able to index some other websites where I was finding this data. Even Twitter, I found that even though you upload an image to Twitter, it will scrub that information. But I found for some reason a lot of the profile photos didn't have it. So I was finding these tiny little icons that have GPS coordinates and things like that. So I was just bringing that in for to see what I could find. But the idea here was we did create this database, and I put it out there, and people started using it for free, and holy crap, it worked. This guy named John Heller, he was on assignment for Getty Images at the Egyptian Theater. He was talking to someone, and he turned around, and $9,000 worth of camera equipment was gone. He heard about the service that I built, and he did a search. And it's important to point out this was a year later. Sorry. About a year later, and he found it. He found the image on Flickr, and then he found that account was also tied to a professional photographer on Facebook who had photos of all his professional camera gear, and there was his camera. And so the LAPD were involved. And so what happened was the guy that stole it from him sold it on Craigslist. He then went and that person stole it on eBay, and then the police recovered it. The police went to the guy that got it on eBay. He had to hire a lawyer. He had to be able to prove that he didn't steal it. And he ended up getting the money back from the seller. They traced it back to the guy on Craigslist, and the guy on Craigslist, oh yeah, I remember where I bought the camera. It was this apartment. I still have the address. I have the text message. The police went there. This is a year later. They go to the apartment, and they found all sorts of stolen property, right? So I just think this is interesting, is that the serial number of a camera that was embedded in an image led to the unveiling of this type of crime. And I always think about what other types of crimes can we solve if we have access to that sort of thing. So again, these sort of rabbit holes that we go down, right? Always think about that. There's always new innovations and new ways that we can help solve some of these problems. Had another case where it was on Craigslist. This one, the guy he was selling a camera. He was going to move, and this guy came out there, showed him the cash. Goes out to the garage, pulls out the camera. The guy knocks him to the ground, punches him, takes off in his car. We ended up tracing this to this one guy. He was this DJ. What's interesting is I started leveraging OSINT, and I started finding all these other images. And he changed his cameras every month, and he advertises himself as a professional photographer. But it's interesting though, is he likes to take photos of himself going over over 100 miles an hour, smoking weed on the freeway. We had GPS coordinates, timestamps, everything. Provided that to law enforcement. In this case, law enforcement didn't do anything. I tried everything I could. I gave them all the evidence that we had at the time, yeah, they never got that one back. I was approached by ICE. There's a group that they do a child exploitation investigations unit. These people are really cool. Some of the stuff that they're doing, where they're actually looking at images that are in a hotel. They're looking at the curtain patterns. They're looking at the bedspread patterns and things like that. And they're able to identify what hotel that is, if it's a Best Western. They can even tell you the location and things like that. And they started doing that, and they asked for access. And so I gave them an API. So the idea here is that maybe Joe Pervert is he's taking bad images, and he's sharing them with these sort of private networks. And then he goes to Disneyland with his family and takes photos using the same camera. If we're able to trace that serial camera matches that, they might be able to hopefully stop a crime. They couldn't tell me if it was actually utilized or if it actually solved a crime, but I like to hope that it maybe did. So, I mean, kind of with all this stuff is I started thinking about all the risks with this as well. You think about all the different pieces of data that are out there. This was, started 15 years ago. Started doing this stuff, and this has only gotten worse. the more we have tons of information that's out there about us. It's gotten to the point now where I don't even consider doxing hacking, because all you need to get information about a person is a credit card. That's all it takes right now to get anything you want about any person. A little bit of hunting, and used to be things that we would do, and that's illegal, things like that. Nowadays, all of our information is basically public, whether we like it or not. Whether it's available through data brokers, whether it's available in underground markets, it's something that we need to deal with. It's kind of funny, I presented some of this stuff at DEF CON, and we were actually approached by some folks in LA. They were working on a show for Crime Watch Daily, and I was able to work with one of our researchers, Craig at Tripwire, a lot smarter than me when it comes to exploiting vulnerabilities and things, but we were asked if we can hack a smart home. And so I'll give you guys just a quick video of the results.
Vicki Johnson's new beachfront house is not only spectacular, it's smart. She can control most everything from her phone or tablet.
It's pretty smart. The drapes go up and down automatically. We can close doors. We can flush toilets. We can turn lights on and off. We can turn the air conditioning on and off. TVs, music. It's a brilliant house. We were told it was hack-proof.
We'll see about that.
They think they're coming to take a tour of a smart house.
But what we're really doing is hacking her house during the party and potentially the devices of every guest who walks through the front door. Helping me are two cybersecurity experts, Craig Young and Ken Westin.
So first we need to break into the Wi-Fi.
Vicki has 28 devices connected to the home's wireless internet. Once they were into the Wi-Fi system, our hackers were quickly able to commandeer the home's cameras.
These are the security cameras to the house that you've hacked into.
Exactly. Here we actually can see this is actually our car out here. This is the front door. If you don't secure them properly, then they become insecurity cameras.
First, we turn off the lights. Then, with control of the security cameras, we divert the video signal and play it on the TV in the living room. With everyone's attention on the TV, the hackers talk to the guests.
We have taken control of this house, the lights, the security cameras.
Now a special message from me in the car is piped in. I'm Anna Garcia from Crime Watch Daily, and this house has just been hacked.
It was free or cheap for the people that are actually implementing the installation.
Vicki Johnson's new beachfront house is not only spectacular.
That was fun.
Vicki.
Yeah, so that was a lot of fun. What's interesting too is that Craig Young, who actually was there with me, he's now at Tesla, which is kind of cool. To crack the Wi-Fi password, we used a cloud cracking service, which we had to pay like some money to do that. But we actually found it was a number. We did a search for the number, and it was actually the guy's cell phone number that was on his website. And a lot of people actually use their Wi-Fi network, like his parents were there, they connected to it. That's why we could have compromised more. When we were in there, I also had access to like a lot of their computer file shares that were wide open. We did have access to the toilet. That was fun. There was a cleaning mechanism, so you can actually make it so that it keeps flushing. It was good times. So kind of when I think about all this stuff, when I think about some of the dangers, right? We think about, okay, well, there's information that can be compromised about us, like even in our own home. Like I think about all of the data. If I get into someone's Wi-Fi network, I could gather a lot of data there. I can get a lot of information about them online. And so I started to think about this. You might be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I started to develop, this is the hierarchy of data bleed. And so the idea here is that at the top, there's data that we create. And that's data that we feel we have control over. When I create an Office document, I create a file on my computer, I have control of that. I can delete it, I can back it up, I can do whatever I want. But then what happens when we start moving things to the cloud, we start leveraging social media, things like that, there is data that gets created for us. And that could be from, when we upload things to the cloud and it's presented to us. It can be when we buy an airplane ticket, when we do all these sorts of things. There's a lot of data that gets generated for us. And we have a lot less control over that. A lot of times that data is now in whatever the policies are of that particular website or that social service, right? We're sort of tied to that. We can request that data be deleted, but we don't know if it's been archived. We don't know how many copies there were. We don't know if they've sold that data. And then further down, there's data that's actually created about us. And a lot of times we don't even know this is happening. A lot of information, when we talk about data brokers, they're gathering all this different data. They're leveraging machine learning. You can build a very rich profile of an individual. And sometimes that data, it can also be compromised. And that's when we get into shadow data. And that's data that's sort of starting to get into the bounds of we consider it illegal, right? If I can get all this information about an individual, maybe their credit card number, their social security number, and this is where you have underground markets where you can actually harvest this information. The more data breaches that we have, I remember it used to be when back in the day when we had a data breach, it was a big deal. You get those letters that, oh, your credit card was compromised or your social security number. We're really sorry. Here's a free year of identity theft protection. I think at this point we all have like 1,000 years of free identity theft protection, and we've become numb to it. So again, so that's where I kind of talk about that's like the shadow data. We have no control over that data at all. If there's no way that we can actually release it. So I'm actually looking forward to Jacob's talk. I think it's after me. He's going to be talking about things that you can do to protect your data. So that should be pretty exciting. I could use it for sure. And sort of on that thing, like I actually was, identified a vulnerability, helped identify a vulnerability that was out there. There was a server that was indexing emails from into Google, and it started with it was one person. We looked at it, and it started actually wrote a script, and I had access to over 2,200 emails. There was no authentication at all. Not only could I read all these emails, but I could send emails, I could reset services, I could get password resets if I wanted to. This is really a pretty serious issue. It was actually Telemex, they'd acquired Prodigy, and so that's where there was some sort of configuration issue. When we approached them, we did this ethically. First I contacted Google to get all the data removed. We contacted them to let them know about the issue. And then we worked with the reporter, and we were talking about this in El Economista, and then they were saying this was industrial sabotage and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, you guys just misconfigured a server. Come on. And so, but this is a situation where a vendor makes one simple mistake, and then your entire digital life can be compromised, right? So again, this is kind of what we're dealing with today. Shameless plug, I actually did some other research where, like when I was at Tripwire, I was investigating a lot of the stolen credit cards and the carding markets and dark nets and things like that, the dark web, and looking at how the markets work. And I started running these forums where I actually found there were hackers that were looking for insider information. So information around like earnings reports or something like that can be traded. And I was like, that's really interesting because with the cryptocurrencies that were happening, I started seeing a lot more like white collar criminals that were in these forums that were looking for hackers. And I was like, if you have white collar criminals and hackers and they get together, like you can just send the cryptocurrencies, they don't even have to know each other, like they can make a ton of money. And I started investigating some of the actual cases, and I found one that was really interesting. There was a case where a group of people, they were accessing this server, the PR servers. They were getting earnings reports. I found a bunch of cases, and so I did some presentations around this, and down the rabbit hole. I started doing this, and then I found there was one where they made $30 million. Right, there was a group of people. They made $30 million off these illicit trades. The bunch of them ended up going to jail. The hackers were in Russia or Eastern Europe. They're still pretty much on the run. And then just recently, there was another case. There was 4 Russians that were found guilty. One of them was a former GRU operative. They made over $84 million in illicit trades. So if you want to learn more about this, there's going to be a Malicious Life podcast about this on the 17th. It's going to come out. I really like those podcasts, the way they're narrated. So I think they'll tell a better story than I can. Hopefully you guys can see that. And with that's the end of my presentation, but I think one thing I just want to kind of leave you with on this is, think about, people always ask me, like, how do I get started in cybersecurity? And sometimes I look back and I'm like, I don't even know how I got started. It's like, how do I get in cybersecurity? And I'm like, I don't know, I'm trying to get out. But I think the important thing is here is like, you sort of follow your passion. Like, especially right now, there's so many different areas of security that you can get involved in. Like cloud security, you can get into DFIR. There's all these different aspects. And there's no way at this point, I think, that you can cover everything. I would recommend getting a general overview of kind of what you like of security, and kind of dig deeper into something, but really follow your passion. If you're not passionate about something, if you're not passionate about what you're doing in InfoSec, you're not going to go very far, I don't think. If you hate what you're doing, you go to work every day and you just, oh gosh, this sucks, right? If you're not able to be excited and have passion about what you're doing and have pride in the work that you're doing, it's going to be really difficult. I've been lucky, very lucky, just kind of find my path and what I've been doing, and I really love what I do. I love the people that I work with in particular. I think InfoSec folks are some of the most creative and smartest people you'll probably see in any other industry. I might be a little biased because all my friends are here, but with that, should I open up for questions? I'll ask questions here, but if you're shy or anything like that, I'm going to be around here all day, so feel free to come up to me. I don't bite usually, so if you have questions or if there's anything I can do to help you, let me know. We'll open up for questions, or do we have time? Or? Okay, great. Or answers, if you guys have any answers too. Please come up to the mic if you have a question. Yeah. I'm sorry, what was the question? The lady who owned the smart house, the one that was hack-proof. Oh no. We ended up, before we left there, we secured all their stuff. We changed all the passwords and all that. So yeah, the thing was everything was set to the default passwords. So we had a Wi-Fi pineapple, and we were getting information about the devices, and we just go and looked up the default passwords. Like one of them was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to get into the security cameras. So yeah, but she didn't get a refund, unfortunately. She did say that she should have got a big dog. Yeah. Oh yeah, sorry. Great. Any other questions? Oh yeah. Do you have a list of people you've helped be prosecuted for criminal activity or asked me if I have a list of the people I've helped prosecute. I did. I have it, a whole list of them. But yeah, this is just a few of the cases. These are the more interesting ones. A lot of the cases I worked on were really boring, like just really simple. And some of the cases I don't necessarily know who the criminal was. I just provided the evidence. I didn't have to go to court. I'm not law enforcement myself. I just told law enforcement what they should be doing. Great. Any other questions? Well, awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.